Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week, this week was a little bit of an experiment. I got back to doing some soft pastel landscapes, and I kind of broke my own rules. So one of the rules that I often say is you should try to use a limited palette, so only a few colors. And I still stick with that most of the time, but sometimes it's good to break the rules, even if they are your own rules. When you're using a limited palette, you can get a sense of harmony in the final composition. But I wanted to sort of push the boundaries of that a bit and try a more dissonant sort of color palette. Lots of different colors, clashing colors, things like that. The reason is that for another project that I'm working on, I was looking into the history of modern art. When did it start? Where did it start? Who were the early modern artists? And not surprisingly, in art history, or any type of history really, there is a degree of disagreement. Different people have different ideas. In fact, even the idea, what is modern art? It's a phrase that's often used, but it's not, when you really look at it, it's not that well defined. What exactly do people mean by modern art? Which in turn then means, they don't agree then with where it started, when it started, who were the first modern artists, and so on. Anyway, as part of this research, one of the things that came up was Fauvism. Fauvism is something that I've looked at before. I've done one or two videos on it before. It kind of fascinates me. It's at the end of the period in art history that I really love, sort of the Impressionist period. So from Impressionism, or maybe even before with Manet, through to the Impressionists, Neo-Impressionists, the Post-Impressionists, and then sort of finishing it off with Fauvism. The Fauvists were not Impressionists, but they were definitely influenced by Impressionism. On screen you can see on the right hand side is a Fauvis painting, and it's by an artist, I think his name was André Derain, perhaps. And he spent a bit of time in London. I think that's the River Thames, with maybe a railway bridge or something across the River Thames in London. The one on the left is by an artist who's also associated with Fauvism, although this particular painting is not really a Fauvis painting, but the artist was Matisse. Now Matisse, if you look at his early work, his really early stuff, if you can find some examples, his landscapes were very traditional in terms of the palette, the color palette that he used. Very drab, very earthy, lots of browns and blacks, that type of thing. The sort of thing that I really don't like in landscapes. But he was a traditionalist, at least in the early days. And then he was introduced to Impressionism, and everything changed. As it often did for other artists as well. Same with Vincent van Gogh. The person who introduced Matisse to Impressionism was an Impressionist artist called John Russell. I think Matisse, when he first spent a bit of time with John Russell, he couldn't wait to escape. I don't think he was a huge fan of this Impressionism. But obviously it flipped a switch or something in his brain, because later on, a year or two later or so, he went back and he studied under John Russell for a short time, but he studied the Impressionist style, he studied the Impressionist color palette, which is the important bit. And then he also spent a bit of time with Paul Signac, who was one of the Post-Impressionists, or I guess really you should say he's one of the Neo-Impressionists, that little tiny movement between Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, where they used the sort of divisionism or pointillism, whatever you want to call it. And you could see in that Matisse painting the sort of little brushwork, the little dots of colour and things. So that's why I say Fauvism is, although it's not a type of Impressionism. It has its roots, I think, within Impressionism, particularly in terms of the colours used, and also to a lesser extent the style of applying the paint, I think. So anyway, that's these two paintings that I did, little landscape paintings or sketches, whatever you want to call them. That was sort of the inspiration. So the colour palette is not harmonious. It's much more in your face. If I was to imagine Fauvism as a person, that person would be probably a door-to-door salesman. Somebody who has the gift of the gab. He can really, he can persuade people. He can speak fluently. And it's quite impressive in short doses, because too much of it can be a bit overwhelming. For me, it's the same with Fauvism. I like it, but not too much of it. It's too bright. The colors are a bit too disorientating. But in small doses, it's interesting, and it's fun to play with. Breaking rules, even if those rules are your own rules about the colors you should normally use. It's good to break those rules and try and experiment with different things. So that was this week's art for me. Fauvism was a small movement in a way. It's short-lived. Say Matisse, Andre Duran, people like that were very associated with the movement. But there were other artists as well who were, if not Fauvists, certainly they were inspired by Fauvism. But they're maybe not as well known. And one of them, one of my favorite artists, whose first name I can never pronounce. I've listened to a lot of French people pronouncing it, but no offense to French people, they do tend to speak quite quickly, and it's difficult. I think for English speakers it's difficult to get a good French accent anyway. But it is, I think, Emile or Emile or something like that. Her name is Charmi. Charmi. Her surname is Charmi. So I'm just going to call her Charmi. Why not? With male artists, you often just use the surname. Gauguin, Van Gogh, people like that. So why not just use her surname as well? Charmi is often one of those lesser known artists who's associated with the early days of modernism, of modern art. She was influenced by Fauvism, she was influenced by Impressionism and other things as well. She was also, for me, an inspiring artist in several ways. She painted a lot of different things. She painted, you can see, self-portrait on the left and still life on the right. She also did some landscapes, other portraits of other people, figure work, and also female nudes, which some people like, some people don't. But the thing is, at that time, it was extremely rare for a female artist to paint nudes, female or male nudes. It was kind of frowned upon. But Charmi wasn't the kind of person who was going to paint what she felt other people would allow her to paint. She was very independently minded, and she decided what she was going to paint and what style she was going to paint it in. It was one of the reasons why I like her. I think it's very important as an artist that you don't let other people decide what you can and cannot paint. Even if it's controversial, even if a lot of people don't like it, I think, and this is part, for me, this is part of modern art. You have to be true to yourself. Modern art, for me, is a very individualistic style of art. It's a more creative style and very much about your own vision. So if you're painting things because you think that will please other people, to me, that's not the right way of doing art. Just my opinion. But anyway, I really admired this artist because she did what she wanted to do. She was also she refused to sign contracts with galleries and art dealers. I don't know how it works these days because I don't deal with galleries, but back in those days it was not uncommon for an artist to enter into a contract with a particular art dealer or an art gallery, and then everything would be sold through that dealer or through that gallery. So it was kind of an exclusive contract. She refused to do that. She was more independent, and sometimes she would work with a particular gallery or art dealer. Other times she might work directly with collectors. So I also admire that. And the fact that she was able to support herself financially as an artist is also something that I definitely admire and respect, because speaking personally, I know how difficult it is to support yourself just through art. It's not easy. So anybody who can do it definitely gets my respect and admiration. So Charmi, an interesting artist, one maybe not super famous, but definitely I would recommend checking out some of her things if you're interested in modern art and some of the early modern artists. She's definitely worth checking out and doing a bit of research. Okay, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.